The engines have turned off. The 2024 Formula One season, the longest in the history of this motorsport discipline with 24 events over 10 months, concluded last weekend with the final event of the season in Abu Dhabi and a post-season testing session at the 5.281-kilometer Yas Marina circuit on Yas Island. The just-concluded Formula One championship was one of the most competitive in recent decades, certainly in the so-called turbo-hybrid era, which started with Mercedes' dominance in 2014, followed by Red Bull and Max Verstappen's dominance. After an incredibly thrilling 2024, expectations for the upcoming year are therefore sky-high. Turning our backs on the recent past, the 8 consecutive Constructors titles won by the Mercedes team until 2021 will not be remembered as among the most competitive in Formula One history. Mercedes essentially had no rivals, except perhaps in the final year when the Drivers' Championship went to Max Verstappen in 2021. The same can be said for the 2022 and 2023 Formula One seasons, which, thanks to the change in regulations, saw the dominance of the Austrian team. The recently concluded season, however, saw a real battle between multiple contenders, both on the drivers' front, but even more so on the constructors' side. Lando Norris tried to disturb Max Verstappen in the race for his 4th Formula One world title, while Ferrari and McLaren succeeded in the not easy or predictable achievement in bridging the gap that Red Bull had accumulated in the first part of the season, and eventually surpassing the reigning world champions. The final gap between McLaren, which ended the championship with 666 points, and Ferrari, who scored 652, was just 14 points at the end of the Abu Dhabi race. 14 points out of 24 Grand Prix means less than 1 point per race, and considering the 6 sprint races that awarded points, less than half a point per event. If we want to quantify it differently, 14 points is a 3rd place, or a 4th and a 9th place more, or a 5th and an 8th place more, and so on. Looking at the data from the last 10 years, it can be seen that the average points difference between the winning team of the Constructors' Championship and the 2nd place team is over 200 points, 208 to be precise. The highest peak was last year, with Red Bull outscoring Mercedes by a staggering 451 points, while the smallest gap, after this year's, was in 2021 with a close 28-point gap between Mercedes in P1 and Red Bull in P2. With these considerations in mind, the focus now turns to next year. The 2025 Formula One season will feature a very stable technical and sporting regulation that should ensure further tightening of the on-track competition. From Max Verstappen, ready to defend his 4 consecutive titles, to Lando Norris aiming for a comeback, and Charles Leclerc determined to achieve his dream of winning a championship with Ferrari, as is Lewis Hamilton, the on-track battles promise to be fiercer than ever. Charles Leclerc has demonstrated extreme speed in every circumstance and, above all, a progressive growth that has gradually smoothed out those typical youthful issues that affect every driver, even the best. His ability to manage tires and his strategic vision have grown over the years, bringing him to the level of the absolute top drivers in the category. The common view is that the Monegasque is ready, and has been for some time, to fight for the Drivers' World Championship. Recent history shows it. When he has been given a car that matches the situation, the Ferrari Academy talent has not disappointed. In 2022, at the start of the season, Charles Leclerc dueled, unafraid of the confrontation, with Max Verstappen. He held his own, was beaten, and beat him back. 2 champions were battling, but at a certain point they could rely on cars with differing performance levels. The RB18 began losing weight and was developed into a powerhouse. The F175, plagued by reliability issues and wrong developments, ended the season in constant decline. Dreams faded in France, where Charles Leclerc made a significant mistake. But it was in Barcelona, with the explosion of the power unit, that it became clear Ferrari had lost the technical duel with Red Bull. In short, this little flashback serves to remind us that, when the technical conditions were good, Charles Leclerc proved that he had the strength to take on a bulldog like Max Verstappen, the driver who is now universally recognized as the best on the grid. Attention also turns to the new challenges awaiting Carlos Sainz at Williams, Nico Hülkenberg at Sauber, and Esteban Ocon at Haas, each expected to embrace a team leader role. Finally, let's not forget the latest arrivals, newcomers only in a chronological sense. We are talking about Andrea Kimi Antonelli, Oliver Bearman, Jack Doohan, and Gabriel Bortoleto, with a likely promotion of Liam Lawson to Red Bull and the subsequent arrival of Isaac Hadjar at Racing Bulls. In short, The grid will feature a variety of talented drivers eager to prove their worth. However, the cars themselves will be just as intriguing. In 2024, the so-called top teams, McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes, all secured multiple victories, showcasing fluctuating periods of dominance throughout the year. Looking ahead to next season, the last under the current regulations, it's only logical to expect even smaller gaps, setting the stage for an all-out war for both titles, and not just at the front of the field. Aston Martin, with the arrival of Adrian Newey, is expected to bounce back, as is Williams. The Alpine team, led by the Oliver Oaks-Flavio Briatore duo, will be looking to build on an extremely positive end to the season. Haas could aim to match its best-ever result in Formula One, a fifth-place finish. The world champion team, given the constant growth throughout the recently concluded season, should be able to easily remain among the top spots in the standings. Stability in the driver lineup could then help McLaren maintain more continuity. Ferrari, the second force this year, can rely on the emotional boost tied to the arrival of Lewis Hamilton and the fact that, under team principal Frederic Vasseur's leadership, they have found a development continuity that had always been missing in previous years. For Red Bull, there are two uncertainties. On one hand, the driver pairing, whether they decide to continue with Sergio Perez or switch to Liam Lawson, might not be on paper at the same level as McLaren's and Ferrari's driver pairs. Furthermore, from a technical standpoint, the loss of Adrian Newey and the lost path in the 2024 developments could be another critical point looking ahead to 2025. Mercedes deserves a separate chapter. The technical crisis is deep and lasting. The difficulties in understanding the car and the correct direction for developments could resurface next year. Similar to Red Bull, the arrival of a very young driver could be a critical point when compared to this year's top two teams and their driver pairings. For the 2025 Formula One Constructors' Championship title, we don't see how any other team could break in, given the results of this year and also considering the driver lineup, which is certainly not on par, with all due respect, with that of McLaren and Ferrari. Therefore, it looks like a two-way fight for the Constructors' title between McLaren and Ferrari. It is likely but not certain, given what Formula One teaches us, especially this year. If you remember, after the first 4 races this year, the championship seemed already decided in Red Bull's favor. As we all know, things turned out differently. It should also be added that in 2025, developments during the year will be conditioned by the 2026 project, which will feature a major regulation change, so part of the season will have to be sacrificed to avoid arriving unprepared for the following one. For now, our F1 prediction, with the engines of the 2024 Formula One World Championship just turned off, predicts McLaren and Ferrari will still be ahead of Red Bull and Mercedes. Ferrari knows it cannot wait for the regulatory overhaul of 2026, but must aim to win already next year, considering that performance convergence has finally been achieved and that 2024 ended on an upward trend. And above all, understanding some principles that we will see in Project 677.